But the most horrible spot lies on the Manchester side, immediately southwest of Oxford Road, and is known as Little Ireland. In a rather deep hole, in a curve of the Medlock, and surrounded on all four sides by tall factories in high embankments, covered with buildings, stand two groups of about 200 cottages, built chiefly back to back, in which live about 4,000 human beings, most of them Irish. The cottages are old, dirty, and of the smallest sort. The streets uneven, fallen into ruts, and in part without drains or pavement. Masses of refuse, offal, and sickening filth lie among standing pools in all directions. The atmosphere is poisoned by the effluvia of these, and laden and darkened by the smoke of a dozen tall factory chimneys. A horde of ragged women and children swarm about here, as filthy as the swine that thrive upon the garbage heaps and in the puddles. In short, the whole rookery furnishes such a hateful and repulsive spectacle as can hardly be equalled in the worst court on the Irk. The race that lives in these ruinous cottages, behind broken windows, mended with oilskin, sprung doors and rotten doorposts, or in dark, wet cellars in measureless filth and stench, in this atmosphere, penned in as if with a purpose. This race must really have reached the lowest stage of humanity. This is the impression and the line of thought which the exterior of this district forces upon the beholder. But what must one think when he hears that in each of these pens, containing at most 2 rooms, a garret and perhaps a cellar, on the average 20 human beings live, that in the whole region, for each 120 persons, one usually inaccessible privy is provided, and that in spite of all the preachings of the physicians, in spite of the excitement into which the cholera epidemic plunged the sanitary police by reason of the condition of Little Ireland, in spite of everything, in this year of grace, 1844, it is in almost the same state as in 1831. Dr. Kay asserts that not only the cellars, but the first floors of all the houses in this district are damp, that a number of cellars, once filled up with earth, have now been emptied and are occupied once more by Irish people, that in one cellar the water constantly wells up through a hole stopped with clay, the cellar lying below the river level, so that its occupant, a hand loom weaver, had to bail out the water from his dwelling every morning and pour it into the street. Such are the various working people's quarters of Manchester, as I had occasion to observe them personally during 20 months. If we briefly formulate the result of our wanderings, we must admit that 350,000 working people of Manchester and its environs live, almost all of them, in wretched, damp, filthy cottages, that the streets which surround them are usually in the most miserable and filthy condition, laid out without the slightest reference to ventilation, with reference solely to the profit secured by the contractor. In a word, we must confess that in the working men's dwellings of Manchester, no cleanliness, no convenience, and consequently no comfortable family life is possible. That in such dwellings only a physically degenerate race, robbed of all humanity, degraded, reduced morally and physically, could feel comfortable at home. And I'm not alone in making this assertion. We have seen that Dr. Kay gives precisely the same description, and through its superfluous, I quote further the words of a liberal, recognised and highly valued as an authority by the manufacturers and a fanatical opponent of all independent movements of the workers. But when I went through there, i.e. the Manchester operatives, habitations in Irishtown and Ancoats and Little Ireland, my only wonder was that intolerable health could be maintained by these inmates of such houses. These towns, for such they are in extent and population, have been erected by small speculations with an utter disregard to everything except immediate profit. A carpenter and a bricklayer club to buy a patch of land, i.e. they lease it for a number of years, and cover it with what they call houses. In one place we saw a whole street following the course of a ditch, in order to have deeper cellars for people, not for lumber, without the expense of excavations. Not a house in this street escaped cholera. And generally speaking, throughout these suburbs, the streets are unpaved, with a dunghill or a pond in the middle, the houses built back to back, without ventilation or drainage, and whole families occupy a corner of cellar or of a garret. I've already referred to the unusual activity which the sanitary police manifested during the cholera visitation. When the epidemic was approaching, a universal terror seized the bourgeoisie of the city. People remembered the unwholesome dwellings of the poor and trembled before the certainty that each of these slums would become a centre for the plague, whence it would spread desolation in all directions through the houses of the proprietary class. A health commission was appointed at once to investigate these districts and report upon their condition to the town council. Dr. K, himself a member of this commission, who visited in every person separate police district except one, the 7th, 11th quotes extracts from their reports. They were inspected in all 6,951 houses, naturally in Manchester proper alone, Salford and the other suburbs being excluded. Of these, 2,565 urgently needed whitewashing within, 960 were out of repair, 959 had insufficient drains, 1,455 were damp, 452 were badly ventilated, 2,221 were without privies. Of the 687 streets inspected, 248 were unpaved, 53 but partially paved, 112 ill-ventilated, 352 containing standing pools, heaps of debris, refuse, etc. to cleanse. Such an Augean stable before the arrival of the cholera was, of course, out of the question. A few of the worst nooks were therefore cleansed, and everything else left as before. In the cleansed spots, as Little Ireland proves, the old filthy condition was naturally restored in a couple of months. As to the internal condition of these houses, the same commission reports a state of things similar to which we have already met in London, Edinburgh and other cities. A whole Irish family is often accommodated on a single bed, and sometimes a heap of filthy straw and covering of old sacking hide them in one undistinguished heap, debased alike by penury, want of economy and dissolute habits. Frequently the inspectors found two families crowded into one small house containing only two apartments, one in which they slept and another in which they eat, and often more than one family lived in a damp cellar containing only one room, in whose pestilential atmosphere from 12 to 16 persons were crowded. To these fertile sources of disease was sometimes added the keeping of the pigs and other animals in the house, and other nuisances of the most revolting character. We must add that many families who had but one room for themselves received boarders and lodgers in it, that such lodgers of both sexes by no means rarely sleep in the same bed with the married couple, and that the single case of a man and his wife and his adult sister-in-law sleeping in one bed were found, according to the report of the sanitary condition of the labouring population, 6 times repeated in Manchester. Common lodging houses too are very numerous. Dr. K gives their number in 1831 as 267 in Manchester proper, and they must have increased greatly since then. Each of these receives from 20 to 30 guests, so that they shelter all told nightly from 5 to 7,000 human beings. The character of the houses and their guests is the same as in other cities. 5 to 7 beds in each room lie on the floor, without bedsteads, and on these sleep, mixed indiscriminately, as many persons as apply. What physical and moral atmosphere reigns in these halls, I need not state. Each of these houses is a focus of crime, the scene of deeds against which human nature revolts, which would perhaps never have been executed but for this forced centralisation of vice. Gaskell gives the number of persons living in cellars in Manchester proper as 20,000. The Weekly Dispatch gives the number, according to official reports, as 12% of the working class, which agrees with Gaskell's number, the workers being estimated at 175,000. 21,000 would form 12% of it. The cellar dwellings in the suburbs are at least as numerous, so that the number of persons living in cellars in Manchester, using its name in the broader sense, is not less than 40 to 50,000. So much for the dwellings of the workers in the larger cities and towns. The manner in which the need of a shelter is satisfied furnishes a standard for the manner in which all other necessities are supplied. that in these filthy holes a ragged, ill-fed population alone can dwell in its safe conclusion, and such is the fact. The clothing of the working people in the majority of cases is in a very bad condition. The material used for it is not of the best adapted. Wool and linen have almost vanished from the wardrobe of both sexes, and cotton has taken their place. Shirts are made of bleached or coloured cotton goods. The dresses of women are chiefly of cotton print goods, and woolen petticoats are rarely to be seen on the wash line. The men wear chiefly trousers of fustian or other heavy cotton goods, and jackets or coats of the same. Fustian has become the proverbial costume of the working men, who are called fustian jackets and call themselves so, in contrast to the gentlemen who wear broadcloth, which latter words are used as characteristic for the middle class. When Fergus O'Connor, the Chartist leader, came to Manchester during the insurrection of 1842, he had appeared amidst the deafening applause of the working men in a fustian suit of clothing. Hats are the universal head covering in England, even for working men. Hats of the most diverse forms, round, high, broad-brimmed, narrow-brimmed or without brims. Only the younger men in factory towns wearing caps. Anyone who does not own a hat holds himself a low, square paper cap. The whole clothing of the working class, even assuming it to be in good condition, is little adapted to the climate. The damp air of England, with its sudden changes of temperature, more calculated than any other to give rise to colds, obliges almost the whole middle class to wear flannel next to the skin, about the body, and flannel scarves and shirts are in almost universal use. Not only is the working class deprived of this precaution, it is scarcely ever in a position to use a thread of woolen clothing, and the heavy cotton goods, though thicker, stiffer and heavier than woolen clothes, afford much less protection against cold and wet, remain damp much longer because of their thickness, of the nature of the stuff, and have nothing of the compact density of fulled woolen clothes. And if a working man once buys himself a woolen coat for Sunday, he must get it from one of the cheap shops, where he finds bad so-called devil's dust cloth, manufactured for sale and not for use, and liable to tear or grow threadbare in a fortnight. Or he must buy of an old clothes dealer a half-worn coat, which has seen its best days, and lasts but a few weeks. Moreover, the working man's clothing is this, in most cases in bad condition, and there is oft recurring necessity for placing the best pieces in the pawnbroker's shop. But among very large numbers, especially among the Irish, the prevailing clothing consists of perfect rags, often beyond all mending, or so patched that the original colour can no longer be detected. Yet the English and Anglo-English go on patching, and have carried this art to a remarkable pitch, putting wool or bagging on fustian or the reverse. It's all the same to them. But the true transplanted Irish hardly ever patch except in the extremest necessity, when the garment would otherwise fall apart. Ordinarily, the rags of the shirt protrude through the rents of the coat or trousers they wear, as Tom at Carlyle says. A suit of tatters, the getting on or off which is said to be a difficult operation, transacted only in festivals and the high tides of the calendar. The Irish have introduced too the custom, previously unknown in England, of going barefoot. In every manufacturing town there is now to be seen a multitude of people, especially women and children, going about barefoot, and their example is gradually being adopted by the poorer English.